Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Webinar Wednesday, Teaching with the Adult Learner in Mind. Thank you for joining us today and taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us. We know that the last 2 weeks have been very challenging for many of us regarding multiple hurricanes, school closings, and basically getting back to our regular schedules. We really hope that all of you and your families are doing well, and we're thinking of all of you. We're also aware that some of you might have relatives and loved ones in the Florida Keys, the Caribbean islands, and Mexico. Our thoughts and prayers are with all of you. Today's webinar is going to be facilitated by Bonnie Gooden and Susan Pittman, IPDA consultants and trainers, as well as national and international trainers for the GED testing service in numerous states throughout the U.S. We also have the Florida Department of Education on the call with us. As you know, this webinar and all IPDA activities are supported through leadership funds from the Florida Department of Education, and we are really appreciative of that. Through our teaching experiences, we have definitely discovered that our adult learners are fundamentally different than the younger students that many of us have taught in the past. Yet most of us have been left to our own devices to figure out how to best reach out to our adult learners who come to our classes with an entirely different set of challenges, demands, and expectations. Well, today we're going to examine a few ideas of how to teach our cohort of students. This will be the first webinar in a series of topics that deal with the adult learner, from andragogy to learning styles to generational differences. Learning more about how our students learn is critical to their success. But before we get started, I wanted to just point out that all attendees' microphones are muted. This helps us reduce the noise that often surrounds us. If you do have a question, and I really hope you do have a lot of questions, please type it into the Q&A section of your screen. We will be monitoring these questions throughout the webinar to make sure that we respond to all of your questions, comments, and concerns. If you have any technical questions or concerns about those, please type them in as well. We'll monitor them and get right back to you and assist you as needed. As in the past, today's webinar and all of our IPDA webinars are recorded. Look for it in the archives on the IPDA website. The recorded PowerPoint, the recorded webinar, the PowerPoint, and the resource guide will be there and available to you within 48 hours. Okay, well, I think I've said enough, so I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie and Susan, who's going to share with you and facilitate our webinar today, Teaching with the Adult Learner in Mind. Bonnie, Susan?
Thank you, June. You know, today we're going to do a lot of different things, but primarily we're going to talk about the principles of something called andragogy. And we're going to talk a little bit about the barriers and motivations of learning for all of our students, and as always, some principles so that we can inform our teaching practices. I'm not sure about you, but as I was looking at today's webinar and thinking about what to put in it, it brought to mind my first time in adult ed. You know, in some respects, it seems like only yesterday when I went into the office of the adult ed director and said, I see that you have instructional positions for night teaching with adult ed. And he looked at me and said, yes, we do. After we talked a little bit, he said, well, you can start tonight. And I said, I can start tonight. And he said, oh yeah, go on into the classroom. You'll have a list of students. There's books on the wall, etc. Just get started. And so, like so many people, I got started teaching adult education sideways. And that's the way we talk a lot of times, that we all enter the role sideways, not understanding what we're going into, not always even having the materials, much less the curriculum. And the other thing, since many of us have come out of a different system, such as K-12, we're not always sure of what it really means to teach the adult learner. In fact, Susan, I'm sure today that we have a number of new folks, brand new to adult education, just like you and I were so many years ago. So to get started, you all have a chat box up there. And so I'd like you to think about the first comments and type in the first thing that comes to your mind. And Susan and I are going to check your chat box just to kind of share some of the ideas. I want you to fill in the blank to describe an adult learner. An adult learner is, and please chat in, what is an adult learner?
Well, Bonnie, we have one here who says it's a very resilient plant. An adult learner is complicated. Oh, you know what? This next one from Gloria. Seeking a new start for so many, this is that opportunity for them to come in and get started over again. And then from Edward, a person who wants to better himself or herself. You know what? This one really is interesting, Bonnie, is that it says bruised. And yes, we do have those who come in and they are bruised and they're looking for something a little bit different. And then we have one from Cindy who says, you know, an adult who's trying to gain knowledge for a class or vocation. And let's see, one who's older in age. Sometimes that is very true. Sometimes coming back, Bonnie, if you think about it, they're coming back because, you know, their children are grown and now they're doing something for themselves. And then another one from Alan is mature enough to recognize that they need to learn through assistance. And from Christina, someone over the age of 18 whom is scared and wants to better themselves, looking for a new start. Bonnie, all these different things that I see on the chat box here, all of those different things are things that I would absolutely agree with. You know, that person who has dreams and that person who really does want to do something next, something that all of us as teachers can be a part of.
I agree, and I like the one that says it's all of us, because it
That's
is
right.
all of us. Okay. Great ideas. Now let's talk about the teaching process, because I'm sure we have some veteran instructors out there. What's one instructional strategy that you currently use with adult learners that you find extremely successful? And if, again, all of these wonderful people who are chatting.
Well, you know what Jana says, turn and talk. And that's really good, that engagement. We also have from Jan, discussions. Again, that getting the students together, sometimes that's some of the most important things, is that engagement. And we have Socratic is another way of looking at it. LaShonda says peer tutors. And then from Christina, I put myself in their situation. I tell them my experience. And you know what, Bonnie, that is really important, because our adult learners, they do have a lot of experiences. They just don't have that piece of paper that so many think of, but they have so many other things. And from Gloria, really good, Gloria, listen. That's another thing about listening.
Oh, and I really like, Susan, we have some of the terms that are out there and work so well, the shared inquiry, the meta-connection, the whole thing about setting goals, and again, having activities that really do engage the adult student, as opposed to some of the things that maybe we use with other kinds of programs. Okay, hold on to all of those ideas, because they really are wonderful, because I see things that go everywhere from individualization to small groups to large groups to all kinds of areas. And it's so true, because as we're looking at learning, we know that we have what we would term the young learners, those learners that we typically see in the K through 12 system. And we also know from all of the studies that those are the students who they learn in a more linear manner, because they've got to have some of those base. And if you think about how you learned as a child in math, we learned to add, we then learn to subtract, we then learn to multiply. And oftentimes in our younger learner programs, the instructor, again, are very dependent on that instructor, because as a young learner, there's just not a whole lot of life experiences. And let's face it, those external pressures when you're a young learner are so important. Am I getting the right grades? Am I wearing the right clothes? Am I doing this? Am I doing that? Gosh, are my parents going to be happy with this? Are my fellow peers going to be happy with this? As opposed to our adult learners, they have a very different way of looking at the learning process, because they already have their own opinions on what they're comfortable with and what they really want to learn. They know where they want to put their effort. We also need to always remember with our adult learners that they may not always know the, quote, academic stuff that we're teaching. However, they have so many experiences that connect into what we may be teaching that day, and those experiences are so beneficial. So there again, they may not know that it's called the Pythagorean theorem. However, their experiences in life may show them that they've applied that theorem many times more than maybe we have as instructors. And the other thing is that they do self-assess, especially if given the correct or effective data. They will self-assess. They will go over the needed information, as opposed to a younger learner who needs more of that outside pressure in. So, are adult learners different than young learners? Yes, they are. And for many of
Bonnie, there is one thing, and this is from Luis, and I think it's well worth talking about just a little bit. His comment is, what do they need? Then what do they know, just as you were talking about with the experiences? And then how can you, as a teacher, apply, build, and share what they have as a basis there? And I think that, that first comment about what do they need, because all of our students coming in needing different types of things. So, Luis, that's a great comment there. Thank you so much.
And I like the way that was said. It really is clear. It made sense to me. I'm sure, Susan, when we first started out in adult ed, just like me, that word andragogy, I'd heard pedagogy. We had all kinds of classes on pedagogy. But all of a sudden, clicking into adult ed, that name of Malcolm Knowles came forward, and the process or the goji of andragogy came forward. And from the research, we see a lot of our andragogy or pedagogy for adult students based upon the initial works of Malcolm Knowles, and of course many people who followed him. And it's really simply the art and science of helping adults to learn, because we know there are some differences. And sometimes the research will say there's 5 differences, some will say there's 7, but what we're going to talk about today, just briefly, are 6 of the real basic aspects of andragogy. And so as we look at these 6 big ideas, as we're looking at how to teach adults, we do need to look at their experiences, their self-concepts, their readiness to learn, their orientation to learning, motivation, of course, and as you said before, one of our participants, that need to know. So, Susan, let's just take a quick look at each of those.
Well, then let's start out with need to know. Because we have, if you think about it, many of us who may have started in the K-12 program, we always thought, in terms of that infamous question we always got from students of, why do I need to know this? Well, with our adults, they have this thing that they need to know, and they need to know the reason for learning something. When you think about everything that's going on within an adult's life, whether they have children and they've got a family to take care of, they have work, they have all of these other responsibilities, they want to know that the time they are spending with you is well spent, that they are going to pull something from that. So it's, adults need to know the reason. It's not just about this is for a test, but where is this information going to go as I continue on? And then as we move from there, we look at experience. And when we look at experience, experience, that includes all those mistakes, But that's really that basis for learning activities, because what we want to do with our adult learners is we want to build on that experience that they have. Let's use that as a critical part of what we're trying to teach, so we can take from what they know, the experiences that they've had, and move from there into the learning activities. But another one, and it came up, is self-concept, because one of our participants who said that many of our students come in and they're bruised, and they need to be an involved part. This is not something that you're doing to them, but it's something you're doing with them. And so adults need to be involved. They need to have a say in planning. And as you said a few minutes ago, that with the right tools, they know how to self-assess, how they evaluate what is going on, and maybe where those roadblocks are and how things might change. The other thing is the topic, the readiness to learn. We want to make sure adults have things that are immediately relevant to what their goals are. What is it they need to know? What is going to help them with work or with personal life? And then from there, we can move on into their orientation to learning. And we really want to look at this as problem-centered, not just content-centered. And we can talk about some of that as we go on as well. But, we have to keep in mind that we can't teach, Bonnie, everything that they need to know, across. But we can help them become more skilled in problem solving and how they do use their critical thinking. And those are things that we very much can do that then has much greater application. And of course, last but not least is that motivation. And we talk about internal factors versus external motivators. And we know how it goes. Bonnie, I'm sure you had students who came in and basically said, well, I had to be here because if I didn't, my mom was going to get upset. Well, that's all fine as an external motivator, but better for when that adult says, I'm here because of what it's going to do for me. And it's about being able to pursue the things that I want to do, as opposed to I'm just trying to make someone else happy. So when you put all those pieces together, that really is what we're talking about when we start talking about the adult learner, and making sure that we're addressing those as we pull those students into our classes, and we keep them there as they're working to achieve those goals.
That's so true. And I love this quote from Carl Rogers: the purpose of adult education is to help them to learn, not to teach them all you know, and thus stop them from learning. And I think we do need to be careful. We look at what we feel someone needs to know, either to get to that next level or to get the GED, diploma, or all of these things. And if we're working on here's a fact, here's a fact, here's a fact, they do close up. And I'd feel the same way. If you would give me a test right now, Susan, on the 6 things that you just told me, and I don't have any notes, I'd go brain dead. I know them, but you're putting in an environment that I go, oh, can I apply them? And that really is about that good thing called application. As we're working with our adult learners, we have to be able to, first of all, explain why we're teaching what we're teaching. If we can't explain a good reason why outside of you need it for a test, then it's not going to make any sense to our students. They're not going to be able to use it. It comes back to, why do I need to know this? We also, and we saw this from many of you, that we need to teach more through the inquiry method, the problem-solving method, because in the real world, I don't have to memorize all the rules, but I do need to know how to access them and apply them. And again, it's got to be task-oriented. These are the things that we know work. And all we have to do is think back to our own education, be it K-12, be it post-secondary. All of the things that we may have memorized, which in today's world, if you asked me what I memorized, I'd say, I have no clue. And yet, I know how to do some of those tasks. Our students don't have enough time to memorize everything, nor do we want them to. So again, much more task-oriented. And our learning materials, our activities have to account for not only the fact that they're adults, but that they've got different learning levels, they have different learning styles, they have lots of different generations in our classrooms. I think we're up to 5 different generations we're teaching. And of course, they all have different experiences with not only real life, but also with technology. So as we apply the teaching of adults, we need to think about all these things as we're developing lesson plans. That's a lot of work, Susan.
Well, that is. And Bonnie, we have a question from Meredith. And I'm going to pose this question to you. Would you consider a lot of what we do as more transformative learning or more self-direct?
I'm hoping it's more transformative. Just because of the way we teach and the fact that we need to give that to students first. They will self-direct their study eventually. But initially, I don't believe that, that is why we are there. We are that facilitator to help them get to the point where they can internally self-direct. But many of them have had, as you well know, Susan, some negative experiences. And so they're uncertain of whether they can do it. Now, going back to self-direct also, you have to combine that with the transformative, because there are times you may say to you, I know I need to learn that, however, is there another way? And so we need to listen. Does that kind of answer?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that that's the thing that we have to look at, is that for so long we looked at things as being like facilitated instruction. But you made a valid point there on the self-direct, that that's a process students have to get to. It's not something that they necessarily come in with. So we want to give them all those tools that we can through that transformative process to allow them to become more self-directed. And all that does is, we talk about it quite often. We're trying to help students learn how to learn. That's really what we want them to do.
Okay, a couple questions for everyone. How many of you learn best through listening to a lecture? If you love listening to a lecture, give me a big yes.
Oh, we have a number of yeses, but then we had one who comes and said, no, and it has a lot of O's on it, Bonnie.
Don't feel bad about enjoying listening to something. That is a wonderful skill, and many of us do like that.
And I think I have a new word here, Bonnie, from Adrian, who says no-ish. So I'm getting a little feeling that maybe that's one of those things that sometimes and sometimes not.
Okay, then I want to know how many of you remember what you watched on television 2 weeks ago. Tell me one show you watched 2 weeks ago.
Now, I do have
TV.
one from Larry that says TV.
I love Dana's. I don't remember what I had for lunch today. Are you kidding? Oh, that's so true.
Well, you know what? I'm still waiting for somebody to pop in, Game of Thrones. I haven't seen that yet. And then Jennifer says, was the electricity off?
Oh, I love it. I love it. Because, there is a thing to be said about humor. But we do have a number of things. Some of you are not quite as specific, baseball, but we also have very specific shows that you watched. So, okay, one more. How many of you remember how to download this webinar?
We better get a lot of yeses.
I love the one that says, I did.
Or I can read the instructions again. But, I am impressed how many of you are able to do that. We're getting a little bit more technology here. And the reason we asked is, quite honestly, as we learn to do things, and this should look familiar, is we do retain and learn information differently. It depends upon how we learn and who we are. And there's something called this lovely thing called the learning pyramid or the cone of knowledge. Most of us have probably seen this in many different venues. The research was done by Edgar back in the 50s and continues on. But when we look at all of it, it talks about the aspect that the passive teaching methods, retention is very, very poor, where if we participate in something, if we are doing, then the retention rate increases drastically. And so as we're putting together all of the aspects of andragogy, we need to keep this in mind. And the learning pyramid is effective not only for adult learners, but for all learners. And in a program where sometimes we see students only twice a week, or sometimes we're teaching a different group of students every other day, it seems like, we need to remember that lecture, reading, audiovisual really have fairly poor retention rates. So if that's all I'm doing and I don't show up for class until the next week again, I have lost 80 to 90% of the information if it is in a passive teaching method. And so we do need to get into more of that participatory teaching. One of those things we all know, but it's difficult sometimes to create enough activities to do that. And we do understand that, but we need to keep that in the back of our mind, that discussion, practice by doing, and having that knowledge well enough that we can teach others is so, so important when we're developing curriculum, lesson plans, etc. Okay. Let's take a look, though we've talked about all these positives, Susan, but you know, sometimes our students, because of the nature of being an adult student, those kinds of things that everybody was talking about previously, what's an adult learner? They're this, this, and this, and generally speaking, they're people who are working, they're people who may or may not have children, they're out on their own, they're over a certain age. And because of all those things, life gets in the way. And so we do need to also keep in the back of our mind at all times, what are some possible barriers that our students have when they come to our classroom? And is there anything we can do about each of these barriers? So what do you think, Susan? Is there anything we can do with lack of time?
Well, I think there is, but you know what I'd like to do, Bonnie? I'd like to get some ideas from people how they begin to move some of these barriers out of the way, because we've all heard these, the lack of time, or I don't have the money, you know, we've heard lots of different things, or this one is always a big one, you know, even getting in that front door is a real problem because it's that confidence issue that's there, or maybe, you know, I just think that the class only meets on a certain night and therefore, you know, well, I can't go then. Scheduling problems, that comes back to not knowing about the different opportunities that are there. And, you know, a lot of those types of things are things that, you know, we can have different ways to deal with. But the red tape, that's another barrier that we really, as adult educators, have to take a look at. How do we lessen that red tape so that it's not a struggle getting in? But, you know, this last one probably is one of the biggest ones that we have. And that's where people come in and they have problems with either childcare or transportation, or, you know, they're there sometimes, they're not there other times, and those things get in the way. But what I'd like to do is know, or what I'd like to know at this point, is what's one thing that our participants do to help students remove those barriers. So I would really like to see some input from everybody.
You're right, because we do know that barriers are always a problem, and we have to be able to, as an adult instructor, come up with some things.
Well, and we do have, you know, one of our participants that no one has time. Well, and that can be a kind of a cop-out, no one has time, but one does have to make time. But then that does come back to getting that motivation right and knowing that we're going to that in that class, those students are going to get their needs met. I mean, that's a big part of it. And we also have from Lucy Wright, their program provides childcare. That's fantastic. Dana Davis set small goals to help build confidence, because that's one of the things from our students. If they lack confidence, let's don't lay everything out in front of them. Let's take it just a little step at a time.
Susan, I'm going to have to say, with the goal setting, that really should not be underestimated, because if we ask our students when they come into registration, what do they want? They'll say, I want my GED diploma, even though at that point maybe they're only functioning at an ABE 3 level. If they say their goal is a GED diploma, think how disheartening it would be after studying for a month or two to not, quote, have my diploma. If that's my goal, and if someone has not assisted me in setting reasonable goals, I'd be out of there. So great ideas.
Yeah, and the other one we have from Jennifer, and this is really good for those of you who work in corrections. Working in the prison, she says you must remove the stigma of looking weak for wanting to learn. And that gets all into the culture that you often find in corrections, where, it's not the greatest thing to be, why are you going on to that class? That whole attitude that can come from there. But, to be able to move past that. Someone else has bus passes and transportation vouchers. And you know what? The key to that being via community partnerships. Because Bonnie, you and I both know there were so many things we were able to do because of community partnerships that we just would not have been able to do otherwise. And so that's such a great way. And, as I'm looking at this list, Bonnie, there's just so many things here that are great responses. Having something students can do online outside of the classroom, building the group and getting that team going to help each other. So many different things that are there.
And I really like, our students do get caught in red tape. So for those of you who are assisting students in registering, for those of you who are looking at barriers and writing them into the AEPs and then putting that person with peer tutors or facilitators, again, having availability at different times, that is wonderful. The other thing, one of the things that Susan and I have seen, and we've experienced this with red tape, is even when students call getting a human being instead of a recorded system, although I know why sometimes we have recordings, many of our students just having to, quote, press 1, 2, or 3 to get the person you need is a problem for them. And so they don't do it.
Absolutely. And, I keep kind of checking back over here on our Q&A, because we have some people answering on chat and some on Q&A. But Susan Merson comes up with a really good one, is that goals may not be getting a GED, but be able to balance a checkbook or read a book to their child or grandchild. And, that comes back to listening, which is what one of them said, to what students really need, and to setting those goals at the beginning of the course.
And that's where self-direction is so important.
Absolutely. So, all right, well then let's go a little bit further and see what we have. Our students, quite honestly, there is a difference between children's motivation for learning and also adults. They're coming to us with different needs. We've already seen that. But, there's some things beyond just, I want my GED, or I want to earn a high school credential. There are some things where students also, motivation can come from the fact that they really want to get those social relationships going. It's a way to maintain social relationships. Or maybe they are looking to those external expectations. There are programs that are out there where your boss may say, look, I need you to upgrade your skills, and here's an opportunity to do that. So there might be some externals. That desire to learn more, and how you can help others, how you can serve others. How many times, Bonnie, have you had a student come in and say, look, I really, I want to be able to help my child with this algebra, but I just don't get it.
So true.
I know, I know I would see that, or that professional advancement, hanging on to that job and being able to move forward. Sometimes it's just kind of an escape or, a way to, get involved in something. And then it can also be because I just want to learn. I have this personal interest. I have this thing that I want to do and I want to learn more. And sometimes it's about licensing too, because we also know programs where getting that high school credential is the first step in that long process of getting licensing for other things. So we have another. So Bonnie, let's get back out to our group again and ask, what is one motivational strategy that you use in your classroom?
We all know that in order to retain students, they need to be motivated to stay. So how do we assist our adult learners in being motivated to stay and to succeed?
Well, I have to say, Bonnie, that this one just strikes really close to everything. This is from Linda Lewandowski, who says, we now have access to a counselor who can help with community resources. Fantastic. And they encourage community events where students can get clothes or food. Think about all the needs beyond just that, math or writing that our students have. And from Alan, we have provide real world meaningful learning experiences. That is such a big part of all of this, is being able to provide those things.
Oh, and we have, Vicki has said they do have free computer skills classes. What a great way to get students more technology advanced and make them feel like part of the group. And of course, we do know academic games and activities are always very motivating with some rewards. Again, doesn't always have to be the whole tangible.
Oh, and Meredith, thank you for sharing the information about the fact that that yes, it can be harder in a DOC facility, but Florida DOC has started following through and awarding game time for receiving the GED or even getting a certain number of hours in class. That's another one that's really important.
And that whole sense of camaraderie, both Susan and I have had many experiences teaching where by providing that camaraderie and that internal support, you start seeing groups of students who, again, motivate each other. And so when one of the group is not there, they're the ones who get on the phone and call. Lots and lots of celebrating of successes, regardless how small, how large. And again, getting back to that career goal, our students are generally coming to us because they do need something. So by setting those career goals and seeing how coming to class helps them achieve that is wonderful. But it does take a little bit of time. And
okay.
LaShonda says it correctly too. Working in a prison, I just listen and offer words of encouragement, affirming that they can do this no matter what. And I have to share, one of our fellow teachers in another state said her motivation, because she teaches math, and she said they always come to class so unmotivated and so giving up. And she said her phrase when a student said, I don't know how to do this. She said, well, of course you don't. I haven't taught you yet. That whole thing of, but you can, give us time. Some great ideas here. And again,
absolutely.
How we feel about it, our excitement, our knowing that they can do it, and that sharing. Susan, you're so correct. It is our attitude as well as our students. So great ideas. They really are. Okay, let's go the next step. And let's talk about teaching practices. And Jim Bryson does a great job of just identifying 5 of them that will engage adult learners. So, Susan, let's take just a few moments to look at what Jim says. Okay. He says that as we are teaching First of all, we need to make sure that what we are teaching has easy delivery methods that are easy to understand and materials that are clear and understandable. I guess that doesn't mean the 500-page book, huh? But again,
No, but you know what, Bonnie? It's a really important point, because we've all had that situation where you think things are clear because they're clear to you, as you're putting them together. But then as you watch faces, and that's one thing I know that both of us always do, is we're constantly watching the faces of people to see, is that information coming through or not? And that's one thing about teachers, is that we have to do that. We've got to watch to see where there's a little bit of a stumble because it's not quite clear what I'm supposed to be doing or what I'm going to be getting out of that.
so true. And this one I don't know that we think about all the time, but we do need to think about fairness, so that when we are working with students, that we provide opportunities and that we demonstrate that willingness to be flexible. Do we understand what our students need? And if they need something that's, quote, not been in the plan, can we be flexible enough? We've all read the studies of students who live or who sit in the front seats or the back seats, or students who do this or students do that. We need to have that same knowledge base as we teach adult students, because those same kinds of things do happen. The student that shows up maybe more often versus a student who comes less often, or the student who sits with the sullen look on his or her face, and I can think of some of my younger students with that, or the students who learn very differently than I learn. The other thing Jim says is we need to make sure that our content and our activities are motivating, that students are attentive to them and they have participation, that they're interesting, also that they're relevant. Why do I need to know that? And we've talked about that before. More important with adult students than with younger students. And again, how do I as a teacher ensure that that content is relevant? How do I as a teacher determine and communicate its relevance? I think there's some things I probably wouldn't teach in today's world that I did teach 20 years ago. They were relevant then, they're not relevant now. And last but not least, how do I ensure that I provide adequate resources? And that I tell students how to access those. That support is so important for our students, both those students who are in attendance all the time and those students who can't come. How do I support them as an adult educator? I really like the way Jim has put these into just 5 very simple things, so that as I'm looking at what I am going to teach, I can ask myself those questions. But we've gone just a little bit further. We've taken Jim's practices, and as you start looking at your lessons to teach, think about these questions. Ask yourself these questions that Jim has. If you're going to take the time to develop a lesson, do you have a set of standards for instructional practices, and do you communicate them? In Florida, are you using the Florida curriculum frameworks to drive your instruction? If the lesson doesn't, then you may question it. Do you use a variety of interest-engaging advanced organizers? That's some more planning, I know. It's very important. Do you maintain a focus on essential content that meets those outcomes? Or as you assess what you're teaching, have you brought in a lot of information not needed? Do you make use of previews at the beginning of a class and reviews at the end? Very important, so that when you come into the next session even, are you reviewing what happened the session before and then previewing what's going to happen now? And of course, do you apply those adult learning principles? And Jim's got a few more. Do you have ways to encourage and reward participation? And you've all told us ways that you motivate. Click some of those in. Do you make use of active learning group exercises to facilitate collaboration? There was a study, remember, Susan, a number of years ago that said the business community, if the education community could teach one thing more strongly, it would be teamwork.
Absolutely.
And
There's two things that you've hit on, especially Bonnie, when you were talking just a minute ago with the questions. One of those being variety and the other being active.
yes.
Two words that are at the heart of all of this, because it can make such a huge difference in each of these different things. But that active learning, group exercises, that's a big one for students personally as they interact with other people and as they carry over those skills into the workplace.
So true. And of course, we do know higher order thinking, problem solving, critical thinking, inquiry, rather than the strongest focus being on memorization. And again, that process approach when it's appropriate to assignments. Those things really work well. And we've included those questions in your workbook so that as you're looking at teaching lessons, take a quick look and just internally say, do I do that? What could I do to add something more into it? So again, just consider an existing lesson that you're currently teaching and consider it through the lens of what you've learned about adult learners or what you know about learners. And think about one element of that lesson that you could change to better reflect those characteristics. Think in your mind that those students could be anywhere from 16 to 116, a very wide age gap, but all under the auspices of the adult learner. So, Susan, I think we want them to think about a couple things.
Yeah, I think so too. Because this is always one of those, we get so caught up in everything that we're trying to do that sometimes we just need a little reflection time. And, make sure that students understand why they're learning something. This is something I always put at the top of the list. This is what we're going to do. This is why. And, being able to have those types of things in front of them. And the fact that, and Bonnie, you and I have said this quite a few times, is that sometimes as teachers, we have to make ourselves uncomfortable so that our students aren't. And that means that we really have to look at those different learning styles and also the different ways that different generations learn. So sometimes, you and I both are baby boomers, and so we approach things naturally in a certain way, but that's not always right for the people with whom we're working. And so sometimes it means that we step out of our own comfort zone and we have to step into the comfort zone of our students. And also that students have that opportunity to experience what they're learning. This is not about having something where, you're going to open up someone's head and just pour a whole bunch of knowledge, but it's about the doing and not just, that passive mode that we often find. And we also have to be very careful that as we're watching students in the classroom, because we have so many different levels and we have people working on different content areas and there's so much that's going on. But we need to know that when that student's ready for us, we're there. The eagle eye is out watching because some students are just not going to ask the questions. And we want to be sure that we're moving forward and giving them that opportunity. And also that we're encouraging students and that we support their learning. Again, sometimes what we say in the classroom may be the only encouraging and kind words that someone has received all day long. And that's going to make a difference to the student in terms of themselves personally, but it's also going to support their learning and encourage them as well. But Bonnie, I think there's just a few more things that we have to take into consideration as well. And this first one actually, I think is something that I've always tried to look at, and I think is most important. We need to set high expectations of the adult learners. We know students can learn. We know students can succeed, but we have to set those expectations and let them know we have confidence in them that they can do that, because for many of our learners, those high expectations have not been of a positive nature. We've also got to use their background knowledge. If we're going to be working, whatever the content may be, there's things our students know that we can access and we can use it, and it's going to help them develop what they know and expand all that. The active learning, so important. You know, your chart that we had, the pyramid, really tells the tale that what students are going to learn and how they're going to learn it, how they're going to retain it. A lot of that comes back to that active learning process. And we want to teach them to think about their thinking. Take time to do that. And we need that informal assessment. It's ongoing and it's feedback, because we all appreciate feedback and that the positives coming forward, so that we know, yes, we're on the right track. So I think all of those things can be really important for us to remember as we're working on these different things.
You're so correct, Susan. Today we try to cover the basics of adult learning theory, better known as andragogy. We know that the adult learner far exceeds what we thought we would have to teach once upon a time, with learning styles and with the different generations. And we'll look at those further in upcoming webinars. But for now, what we want to do is just take a couple minutes to reflect questions and answers. And while you're thinking questions and answers, we're also going to tell you that if you're interested in some more materials on the adult learner, don't forget on Florida IPDA, Florida's Instructor Handbook, there's a whole section on the adult learner. And although it's in the GED Prep Handbook, it works for all levels. Also know that the lesson plans, the grab and goals, the toolkits, the e-trainings, all have been developed for the adult learner, with the adult learner in mind. So having said that, questions that anyone has or comments about these wonderful people called the adult learners whom we serve.
And Bonnie and Susan, I just want to point out that you've talked a lot about active learning strategies and exercises, and we're going to have some webinars that are going to be coming up really soon in giving the field direct activities that can be implemented directly into the classroom. Jenna Moniz from Broward County is doing some really great work out there, and will be conducting a few webinars for us on that subject.
That's fantastic. And I do notice Jeff Arnott out of Brevard, they have a Facebook page where they do a lot of posting of their successes. And that's, Susan and I love going out and seeing all the successes. GED Testing Service does the same thing on their Facebook, and I'm sure that many of your districts and colleges also do that. It's wonderful for students to see their successes in a social media site, so I can't say that enough. That is marvelous. And Dubrovka, teaching adults is the most rewarding of all jobs. Yes, we agree with you. We love what we do. And let's face it, when we work with each other in trainings, it is also teaching the adult learner.
And Bonnie, we have from Stephen Finch, I'm sorry. Bonnie, where can I find the info to find out how a student learns? And so if we want to pull back again to the, you have the website here so that you can find out more about the adult learner. And Bonnie, you want to mention the workbook that they have, the resources?
Yes, I can definitely do that. One of the things that you will want to do, and we will have a further workshop on learning styles, but to get you started, if you go into the Florida's Instructor Handbook for GED Prep, the adult learner, if you go into that booklet, you will find more information on learning styles. So that's one very quick route to go to get you started. You also have a very small workbook that goes along with this particular webinar. And Susan, I hope you guys can see that now.
Yes, yes, we can.
And within that, you have just some brief overview of the characteristics of adult learners. For those of you who like things in chart format, you have, again, the differences between pedagogy and andragogy. A little bit of a outline of those 6 basic elements of andragogy. And then you've got those questions that we talked about at the end, that you can take a quick look at your own lesson plans, your own classroom sessions, and ask yourself these questions, whether, again, absolutely working on it or not currently. Just like we don't expect our students to be perfect, of course, we don't expect ourselves to be perfect. These are good things to just keep asking ourselves as we go along.
And a lot of you out there are providing some great resources for us, so we'll gather up those resources and post them as well underneath this webinar. Thank you for that.
Other questions or comments, Susan?
We have one resource that June was just mentioning. That is from Meredith, and she's provided a website with Nixall about some new adult learning, 3 new theories, and to helping explain adult learning theories. So as June said, that's another great thing that can be posted is from this.
Okay, great. And I will tell you, any questions that you do have or additional information that you would like, such as Stephen with the learning styles, etc., if you don't find what you would like, just do a quick message to Florida IPDA, and June will get that to us to get specific information to you. Just realize that Florida IPDA is always there to answer your questions and provide additional resources. So having said that, my adult learners for the day, Susan and I would like to thank you very, very much for being with us, and we hope you tune in when we talk more about learning styles and generational differences in upcoming webinars. June, anything else that you would like to provide to the field before we call it a close?
I just wanted to thank you both for facilitating this webinar for us, and also from the field with the great collaboration and all the questions and all the information that came in. Remember to definitely stay connected with us. We'll definitely help you out with anything that you may need to help you to do a great job that you're doing each and every day. Thank you again for joining us, and stay safe.